Wow, what an absolute dumpster fire of a day with the Chinese AI app becoming available to the public. And with that, you can see we absolutely cratered here. You could argue we were going to do it anyway. We said we were bearish going into the day, but this was massive. Went from 607 down to 591, touched the low, touched the trend, got a bounce into the end of the session. But let's take a look at the charts and see if we can find some trades for tomorrow. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and watch the video till the end to help out the channel, and let's get started. Shout out to NVIDIA for losing the most money in a single day by any company in history with $600 billion, plummeting 17%. Absolutely massive in the sell-off, catalyzed by the DeepSeek AI release. Supermicro also falling by 8.7%. You can see after hours, a little bit of a bounce there, almost 3%. Obviously not a huge move relative to what happened today, but it's not nothing. And then, like I said, 17% down to 1850. 118.50. We'll take a look at the charts there a little bit later. This was just after NVIDIA surpassed Apple. Now Apple did better on the day, so Apple's in better shape again, now becoming the most valuable company in the world. And the big concern around this, like I said, is DeepSeek. They built it in 2 months for less than $6 million with reduced capacity chips from NVIDIA, the H800s. Definitely something that is cheaper and far more available than their most recent, most capable models. And if people can buy the cheaper chips from NVIDIA, that's going to cut into their profits. GPUs have been bought en masse basically as fast as they can be produced by Alphabet, Meta, Amazon, as well as ChatGPT on the Microsoft side. And if people can buy cheaper chips and not pay as much for them, that's going to hurt NVIDIA, obviously. Moving into fear and greed, we talked about how this was kind of a turning point. If it was going to do it, it was probably going to do it here. Otherwise, it was probably going to push into those extreme greed areas. And sure enough, we got the pivot point on the catalyst down to a 39 from a 48, back into fear on momentum. Strength starting to slow a little bit, but still in extreme fear. Breadth continuing to gain just a little bit. Interesting there. Put call ratio still very, very low. Slight step up here. Volatility obviously spiking. Safe haven demand cratering makes sense with bonds outperforming. And then junk bonds still do not care. Moving over to earnings. AT&T beating pretty much nobody else matters here. And then looking at tomorrow, Boeing, Lockheed, Starbucks, fairly interesting. Chubb, JM, JetBlue, and Vesco, fairly interesting. And then if you hold anything into the close tomorrow, obviously those are going to be heavily impacted here for the Wednesday. Meta, Microsoft, Tesla, T-Mobile, IBM, all those heavy hitters coming out after hours here on the Wednesday. Moving over to the economic calendar, you can see new home sales, pretty good. For December, month over month number is not super great, but previous number was very good, and it was also revised up very heavily, so that's good as well. Yields coming down a little bit in the auction, like to see that. Quarter roll goods tomorrow, fairly interesting, might move markets a little bit. Consumer confidence, definitely interesting, want to see how that's doing. The expectation is a little bit of a step up, so that's good as well. If it comes through, Atlanta Fed GDP, very interesting, stepping down to a minus 0.8 for Q4. Honestly, surprising that's not being talked about a little bit more. Minus 0.8 for Q4 would be absolutely massive. Previous number was 3%. You can see here, minus 8% for the forecast. Absolutely interesting. And then for the Wednesday, of course, FOMC going to dominate. We have all of that earnings after hours on the back of FOMC. The volatility for Wednesday will be pretty aggressive in my opinion. And just like that, with the spike down, we are very close to max pain. Max pain is 595, much closer than I thought would be this early in the week. 599 is the price. Total options absolutely massive there at 1.9 million. For a non-options expiration week, and the put call ratio is also extremely high there at a 4. My guess is with that many options, especially puts in the market, we're just not going to be able to go that much lower. We said 590 was the low, pretty much touched that today and bounced pretty massive, so not expecting a whole lot more downside potential. Not to say that it can't. Markets can absolutely do anything at any time for any reason, but that is a big number there on the put call ratio. And then moving over here to the charts on the S&Ps, you can see the massive gap down right to the zone that we talked about. I think I said something along the lines of, I think we're going to get into this area here between 592 and 594, but I don't expect it to happen in one day. And sure enough, just like that, we gap to it in one day. Absolutely massive. Very, very strange there as well. Let's go ahead and extend out this trend line here. Gives you a little bit of trend support in around that 592 area as well. So this is what we were looking for. And now we touched the level. We got a bit of a bounce at the low there. Like I said, 595, pretty much in that area, max pain area. Hit the 55 EMA, almost the 21 EMA. After hours, a little bit of a bounce. So maybe this is the down move that we needed. Momentum, obviously not satisfied on that down move. We almost touched the SMA on the RSI. I'm sure we touched it mid-session, but on a closing basis, we didn't. Big volume coming through there. It looks like buying volume, actually. Kind of hard to figure out what this is going to do at this point. So you had a double top in here, technically a new all-time high, but then we ended up giving it back on the Friday, selling off here on the Monday. In terms of thesis, obviously, you're going to be a little bit bearish coming off of the massive gap down. You can see it here. Gap to 598, sold to the trend lines in here. And then putting the levels back on, 591 was my level in there. So you had a confluence of trends and levels in here. Makes sense. Came right to the zone, touched it. Now we've retraced back to that 21 EMA on the hourly chart, right at the level 599.64. This has been a critical level multiple times. As soon as we broke it here, held it, big move up. As soon as we touched it here, immediately rejected to a much bigger down move. So critical zone. Waiting to see if we can hold this level in tomorrow's session or not. Again, the volume was buying volume, and it was at the end of the session. Could have just been closing of short positions in here because it did look a little bearish going into the Friday. We talked about it. We'll see. Critical zone, like I said, if this breaks though, 591, somewhere in there. Remember, max pain is 595, pretty much on that 200. And then looking at the Tasty charts just for a moment, you can see it took us back into the middle of the range. We're kind of in the same consolidation range that we've been in for a while now with that down move here. On the hourly, obviously very, very extended, took out all the levels, pulled back into the middle of the range. Now, if it's going to reject, this is probably the zone. Your 8 EMA is 599.12. Watching that 599 level that we just talked about. If it's going to reject and cut through the zones, your low is going to be all the way back down into the 591 area. So pretty much a double bottom potential in there. And then looking at that 4-hour chart, the range had gotten pretty tight here. Now you got the big move. You're getting a bit of a spread there. 8 EMA as your resistance at just about 601, a little bit below it, $600.92. Moving over to the NASDAQ, obviously same gap down, a little bit heavier, almost 3% on a closing basis, a little bit more on the lows. You can see big volume, momentum stepping down, cut through these EMAs, so a little bit worse on the charts. Your support was 509.74, almost touched that, caught a bit of a bounce. On the close, 514.92 was the resistance, and then after hours, you can see 515.21 getting a little bit of a push through there. Needs to hold that level if it's going to do it. Otherwise, we're probably headed back to 509. You can see the pre-market lows in here were 503.50. Threw a wick to that level and then caught the bounce into the open. So we'll see. Again, if it rejects from here, it's going to be bad, at least to 509, probably lower. But if it can hold in here, maybe we get a little bit of a relief rally. I would still expect a lower high, not even expecting really a gap fill of any kind, in my opinion. It's just too big of a gap, and I would expect it to sell off a little bit more from here. Again, watching 514.92. I think it could hold it potentially for tomorrow, but then into the FOMC and the other earnings on Wednesday, I think it's going to be a harder ask. And then looking at the Tasty charts just for a moment there, you can see we obviously rejected off of that lower high setup, off of those ATR trailing stops like we expected to, a little bit more aggressively, a lot more aggressively than I thought it would, but now we're here at that 55 EMA there, 513.66. Technically, we're above it right now. We'll see if it ends up holding this zone. Still potentially could be a higher low setup. We said that that was a possibility going into the weekend. It's just happening quite a bit more violently than I thought that it would. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, these cared far less. You can see the Russell was down 1%. We did have a bit of a topping pattern. Figured we were going to come into this 226 level, and we did. Took an opportunity here. Honestly, probably premature. I think we're probably going to go a little lower, 223, but It is 1% lower. It's not nothing. And then looking at the Dow here, the Dow did not care at all. Quick dip to the trends here. Let's extend that out just a smidgen, and then got a bounce there. Ended up 0.68 back above the 445 level. So it gave you a bit of a buying opportunity there if you were watching the Dow. I don't really trade the Dow, but was good, and it was the best on the day. Moving over to the Mag 7. The Mag 7 actually held in extremely well, considering you had a ton of them that were down a lot, and then you had Apple hanging in there really, really strong. So it was down 1.36, much better than the NASDAQ as a whole. Came in, touched the level. 315 was what we were watching. Touched the support, caught a bounce. After hours looks good. Huge volume. Look at that volume. Over a billion volume on the Mag 7. Really, really strong there. Again, after hours looks okay. We'll see if this is enough to kind of shake out the bears a little bit, pull in some bulls and get a little bit of follow through potentially, or if this is now the breakdown, the start of the breakdown, touch the level, retrace. It looks like you even got the gap fill there. The close on the Friday was 328.61, and then the high of the day was 328.66. So you even got the gap fill on the Mag 7 and then started to sell off a little more. That is concerning. And it'll be interesting to see which way this breaks tomorrow. Moving over to Apple and Microsoft. Apple having a great day. You can see there 3.18% to the upside. We talked about this consolidation. We talked about the trends. Ended up holding. Momentum was stepping to bullish, and then you got a big move there through 224 right to the next level, 230, and the 144 EMA did close below it, so you have resistance now at 230. Talked about a relief rally into the zone, 21 EMA sitting there at 238.86. If we did get into this zone, I would expect a lower high setup, continuation lower, but you never know. We'll see if it has any strength in it. And then we got to extend out this trend line. Definitely not something I expected to hit so quickly here, but gapped through this zone. Big drop right to the trend, right to the levels in here. And then we ended up getting a rally back, finishing in the 435 area. Momentum obviously still stepping down. I'm sure we touched this SMA mid-session, but not closing. So we'll see if there's a little bit more downside, get the touch there, or if it's going to just push right back to these levels and then continue higher. And then moving over to Tesla and NVIDIA, the dumpster fires of the day. Tesla down 2.3%, broke the trend here like we talked about. 55 EMA right there at 383.93, the level 384.28, and then NVIDIA was the worst here, down nearly 17%. It was at one point, like we talked about, and now catching a little bit of a bounce after hours, $3 or so. It's right at the trend here. This was the target if this zone broke and it gapped through all of that, hit the trend. Now we're a little bit above it. It'll be interesting to see if we get a little bit of a rally here. Lower high setup, continuation lower potentially, or if it cuts through all of that, 106, that would be interesting. Last time we were here was October of 24, so gave back a ton of gains, but we'll see what happens. Absolutely looks terrible. Not something I would be looking to get long, at least in the short term. Moving over to Amazon and Google. Amazon did not really care at all either. They did dip down really aggressive to the trends here, and then rallied back up, finished positive on the day, 0.25%. Alphabet, not nearly as much. We talked about this trend being resistance. We touched it, consolidated, broke down. Now we're back at 193.31 as your support. Got the trend support in there as well. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, doesn't look great, down 4% on the day. Still waiting for this consolidation to break down. I do think that it will. Moving over to Meta and Broadcom, you can see Meta very, very strong, continues to look very strong, new all-time highs, does not care at all about the AI threat. And then you got Broadcom down 17.4%, pretty much in line with NVIDIA. Obviously, the chip threat that we talked about hitting the chip makers really hard. Huge earnings. At this point, you would expect potentially a gap fill back down to here around 180. Momentum bearish, RSI obviously super bearish. Huge volume, 90 million. Your average volume is around 20 to 30 million. Moving over to staples and discretionary. Staples catching an absolutely massive move, 2.71%. Big gap, big rally, push through these zones. You don't see moves like this too often in staples. We said we found support in here. Got the push, retest, continuation, very, very strong. Doing everything we thought that it would there. And then looking at discretionaries, did gap down, did touch some supports, closed positive on the day, but Staples continues to outperform. Moving over to 20 and 50-day breadth here, you can see continuing to go just a little bit higher in the 82.90 area, just about as high as it gets. Not all the way there, but almost. And then looking at 50-day, continuing to be very strong, push through this zone here, looking for that 62.25 area. So really the stocks that were affected the most were the chip makers and then the AI plays. Everything else managed to do very well. But those were enough to sink markets, especially the NASDAQ. So we'll see how it plays out. Right now, breadth continues to look pretty strong. Moving over to the dollar was choppy on the session, ended up with a doji candle, went lower, went higher. You can see big moves there. Finished really very little changed, down about 4 cents on the day, nothing crazy, 0.04. Momentum still very bearish, RSI still very bearish on the daily, but that is mixed here with the RSI on the hourly chart. Momentum bullish, RSI a little bullish there on the hourly. So mixed signals make sense why we got the doji. Moving over to bonds. Bonds continue to rally. Been continuing to say buy them up. Continue to move. You're missing the opportunity here pretty soon. If we break out from here, you have the low kind of left shoulder, right shoulder here. Retest the 21, big rally out. I think we're going to go quite a bit higher from here. Probably in the 92 range. So a couple of percentage points expectation. It was up about 1% here today. So everything continues to look good on the bond trade, and I continue to bang the drum. Moving over to the VIX, what a move here. The high for the VIX was at 22.5, got all the way to the peak back from the 13th. Momentum stepping to bullish, obviously. RSI stepping to bullish, obviously. Based on this, you would expect a little bit more to go. Volatility, I would also expect to go higher as we get into these major earnings and the FOMC this week. So big spike up. I would expect a little bit more out of this. Expecting some lower lows to come. Is it going to happen immediately? Probably not. I would expect a little bit of pullback in time, but for the Wednesday, in that time frame, Wednesday, Thursday, makes more sense to me. Moving over to my accounts, you can see I actually did fairly well on the session. I made a little bit of money on my main account. I think I made a little bit more during the session. I'm not sure why it's showing a little bit less there, but the Russell's falling after hours. That's taking away from it. You can see closing price there was $26.53, bought the stock $26.62. So I lost about 10 cents during the session, but since then it's fallen about 60 cents or so after hours. Definitely interesting to see that movement there. I have the 227 call on for $85, so looking to make a little money there, which is also negative. Obviously that wouldn't be the case during the market session, but during the after hours, the options pricing does not move. So we'll see. This would be a flat trade if we were able to close it right now, in my opinion. Once we see markets open, we'll see what happens. Like I said, I was probably a little too aggressive here on the Russell. If that 226 breaks with any kind of movement tomorrow, I'll take this position off and look for the next level. But for now, this is what I have. And then for the Qs, 511, 510 on these for about $2.60 credit. The volatility is high, so I'm trying to take advantage of that. Again, like I said, I think we'll see a little bit of pullback in time on the VIX, as well as the Qs. Want to see those kind of consolidate a little bit. But I still think we're probably going to go lower into the Wednesday, Thursday. Let me know down in the comments section what you thought of markets today. Let me know what you thought of the DeepSeek and the impacts of that on markets. Is it warranted? Is it a little too aggressive? Let me know. Otherwise, like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. Make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.